Hey everyone, and welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into a mystery that has, quite frankly, baffled biblical scholars for centuries. We're zeroing in on an ancient text that holds a totally unique and literally controversial place in religious history. I'm talking about the Book of Enoch. It's wild, because it's a text that actually gets quoted in the New Testament of the Bible, yet it was ultimately banned from the biblical canon altogether.
So, here's the massive central paradox we're investigating today. If the Bible quotes Enoch as a prophet, why on earth isn't his book actually in the Bible, right? It's a question that has totally confounded both historians and theologians for hundreds of years. Like, how does a text go from being cited by biblical authors as authoritative prophecy to being actively suppressed and labeled apocryphal? Well, to figure that out, we really need to dig into the historical facts and the intensely heated debates among early theologians.
Part 1. The Mystery of Jude.
Now, what's really interesting about this text comparison is just how identical they are. Listen to the Epistle of Jude, verses 14 and 15, which explicitly states that Enoch in the seventh generation from Adam prophesied, saying, "See, the Lord is coming with 10,000s of his holy ones to execute judgment on all." Okay, now compare that to 1 Enoch 1:9. It reads, "Behold, he comes with the myriads of his holy ones to execute judgment on all." You know, it's pretty much verbatim. Jude is undeniably 100% quoting the Book of Enoch.
Now, for a long time, some folks actually argued that the biblical Enoch, the seventh from Adam mentioned in Genesis who lived thousands of years ago, literally wrote this book. But historians and scholars classify the Book of Enoch as pseudo-epigrapha. Essentially, this means it was written by later authors who attributed their own work to the ancient patriarch Enoch, mostly to give the text enhanced authority. In fact, scholars point out that the text relies heavily on much later biblical books like Deuteronomy. So yeah, the historical Enoch couldn't have written it unless he had a time machine. So when was it actually written? Let's walk through this absolutely wild historical timeline together. The oldest section of the text, known as the Book of the Watchers, was written around the 3rd century BC. Fast forward to the 1st century AD, and it's highly influential, being quoted by early Christians like Jude. But then, things change. By the 4th century, as historians note that theological orthodoxies really solidified, it was excluded by church authorities like the Council of Laodicea. It was actually completely lost to the Western world for over 1,000 years, until it was famously rediscovered in Ethiopia by a Scottish explorer named James Bruce in 1773. Talk about a crazy journey.
Now, some skeptics used to claim, well, maybe the Book of Enoch actually copied the Book of Jude, but archaeological evidence definitively shut that theory down. Fragments of the Book of Enoch, specifically designated as 4Q201 and 4Q204, were actually discovered among the Dead Sea Scrolls. Carbon dating places these scrolls squarely in the Hasmonean period. That means they're from decades before Jesus was even born, let alone before the Epistle of Jude was written. For historians, this absolutely proves Enoch was a highly influential Jewish text during the Second Temple era.
Okay, let's dive into this next section. Part 2. Angels, Giants, and Calendars.
What historians find so fascinating is that the Book of Enoch takes a very brief, super cryptic passage in Genesis chapter 6 and just explodes it into a massive sci-fi-like epic. It details the Watchers' rebellion, this intense narrative where angelic beings actually descend to Earth. And they don't just, hang out. They impart forbidden occult knowledge to humans, things like weapon making and sorcery. They also mate with human women, spawning the Nephilim. And according to theologians studying Enoch chapter 7, these weren't just tall guys. They were literal giants, 300 cubits tall, who devoured the labor of men and eventually started devouring the flesh of humanity itself. Pure chaos.
And this brilliantly illustrates what theologians categorize as a massive theological friction point. You see, on one side, you have the orthodox biblical view, which places the origin of sin squarely on human responsibility, stemming directly from Adam and Eve. But the Enochian view? Well, it attributes the origin and proliferation of extreme evil to angelic corruption via the Watchers. This dualistic view of cosmic forces swooping in and corrupting humanity, well, it made mainstream Christian and Jewish authorities incredibly suspicious of the text.
But hey, it wasn't just angels and giants that caused problems. 364. That is the exact number of days in Enoch's highly unique, angelically revealed solar calendar. And this directly contradicted the traditional lunar solar calendar system that was used by mainstream Jewish authorities at the time. Historians actually note that sectarian groups, like the Essenes over at Qumran, strictly adhered to this Enochian calendar, which of course just further isolated the text from mainstream Orthodox approval.
Part 3.
Early theologians debate Enoch.
It turns out some of the early church heavyweights fiercely defended the text. Take Tertullian, for example. He was a major theologian writing in the 3rd century who heavily argued for its authenticity. He literally called it scripture and explicitly stated that nothing in it should be rejected. Tertullian even argued that the text was only rejected by Jewish authorities simply because it contained prophecies that so clearly pointed to Christ as the ultimate judge.
But contrasting Tertullian, we have experts like Origen, and he pushed back hard against its authority, noting that the books bearing Enoch's name did not circulate in the churches as divine, period. Other documents from that era, like the Apostolic Constitutions, went even further, aggressively labeling apocryphal books of Enoch as pernicious and repugnant to the truth.
Ouch. Meanwhile, Jewish rabbinic leaders were also suppressing it. Rabbi Simeon ben Yochai, a highly respected 2nd century sage, indicated that while the wise might study it in secret, it absolutely had to be kept away from the general public. And this matters deeply. He feared that laymen would misunderstand its intensely complex mysticism, extract perverted ideas from it, and ultimately be led astray into heresy and the worship of angels rather than the worship of God.
Part 4. Why was it banned?
So when modern historians look back at these early councils, they note that incredibly rigorous criteria were used to establish exactly what belonged in the Bible. And honestly, Enoch simply didn't pass the orthodox test. It lacked verifiable apostolic or patriarchal authorship, it diverged way too heavily from accepted doctrines regarding the origins of sin, its overly detailed angelic hierarchies were viewed as spiritually dangerous, plus it was entirely absent from the accepted Jewish Hebrew Bible. And finally, around 363 to 364 CE, the Council of Laodicea stepped in and officially excluded it.
So, the crucial point is, while early church councils initially excluded it, the Protestant Reformation truly cemented its fate in the West. In the 16th century, reformers like Martin Luther sought to distance the Protestant canon from absolutely anything they considered apocryphal or superstitious. By strictly prioritizing the Hebrew Bible as the Old Testament standard, Luther permanently locked Enoch out of the Protestant Bible we know today.
But here is a fascinating twist that almost always surprises people. 81. That is the exact number of books in the Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church Bible. Because while the West banned and essentially lost the Book of Enoch, the Ethiopian Church preserved it. They placed it right alongside all the other books of the Old Testament, meaning that to this very day, the Book of Enoch is still considered divinely inspired canon by millions of Christians. How amazing is that?
So, we end today's explainer with this somewhat provocative thought. Does excluding a text from the canon actually erase its historical influence on the foundations of a faith? Because even though Enoch was banned, modern scholars totally agree that its DNA heavily shaped early Christian eschatology, concepts of the Son of Man, early demonology, and of course the biblical Book of Jude. Banned or not, the shadow of Enoch still stretches across history. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning the history behind the pages.